My dear countrymen, here is an announcement. It is with the greatest pleasure that I announce to you today the overthrow of the corrupt regime of Daniel Toroi Arap Moi by the patriotic forces of our country. As I speak to you now, our country is fully and firmly under the control of our armed forces.
The burden under the regime grew unbearable. Secret meetings were happening at 4th Avenue, Gong Road. The last of those meetings happened on 31st July 1982. Many men attended the meetings. I speculate Raila was among them. I don't know of Koigi, but I am rooting that he was. The two that I am sure of were one, Hezekiah Ochuka, and two, Tito Ndugosi, the SONU chairman. Jerry Rawlings, a Ghanaian revolutionary, and Hezekiah Ochuka had many things in common. For one, they were both in the military, serving under the air forces. Both were part of the Free Africa movement, an underground movement of military officers who wanted to unify Africa through a series of coups. Both were the leaders of People's Redemption Council in their respective countries. In 1979, Jerry Rawlings attempted a coup in Ghana. He failed, was arrested, and was sentenced to death. But a few days later, Jerry was broken out of jail by his soldiers. He led another coup, but the second time he succeeded and ruled Ghana for over 20 years. In 1982, it was Hezekiah's turn to lead a revolution. On a chilly Sunday night, 3 a.m., 2nd August 1982, Ochuka and his forces took over the Isili Air Base, the Embakasi Air Base, and the Voice of Kenya broadcaster. He gave this infamous speech.
My dear countrymen, here is an announcement. It is with the greatest pleasure that I announce to you today the overthrow of the corrupt regime of Daniel Toroi Arap Moi by the patriotic forces of our country. As I speak to you now, our country is fully and firmly under the control of our armed forces. Long live Kenya. Long live the People's Redemption Council. Thank you very much.
Titus Ndugosi added his bit.
This is a statement on behalf of all the students of Kenya. On behalf of the students and the people of Kenya, we, the University of Nairobi students, register our wholehearted and unconditional support for the August 1st revolution organized by the Kenya People's Redemption Council. We humbly request our new popular government to accord us the freedom we have always cried for. Thank you.
He had led a coup. He was now the leader of Kenya. But until 11 a.m., Ochuka was arrested and was sentenced to death. He hoped that he would be rescued by his soldiers and lead another revolution like Jerry Rawlings, but no. he was to die. The political movement that was supporting the coup was so underground that even the intelligence service could not unearth it. But even though it was abortive, the 6-hour ordeal would change Moi for the worst. He'd do two things that stood out. One, he pushed for the completion of Nyayo House. The special branch was tasked with making interrogation rooms at the basement. The rooms were to be well reinforced, compact, and dark. A near duct was connected to the cells but was to be controlled from a top floor. A cold water inlet and outlet was also installed and controlled from that top floor. Then, a dedicated lift was set to serve only the basement where the interrogation cells were and the top floor where the controls were. And two, punishing the culprits. There was a national-wide crackdown on anyone who participated or was thought to have participated in the coup. Titus Adugosi was among those who were arrested. During his trial, he famously said that he was true to the president of the day, which, in retrospect, was correct because Ochuka was the third president and the president that Sunday morning. A journalist in the next day's paper wrote that on that Sunday of the coup, Koigi Wawamwere was at Nanyuki Air Base distributing uniforms to the revolutionaries. On 6th August, Koigi was arrested and taken to Kamiti. He was back to the cell which he had left in 1978. He was later transferred to Manyani, where he served for the rest of his detention. On 11th August, Raila Odinga was arrested and also sent to detention. Others who were arrested and detained / jailed at that time included Kuria Wamwere, Koigi's brother, Dr. Amin Mazrui, David Mokarungana, George Anyona, Dr. Edward Oyugi, Kamoje Washira, Mwangi Boreithi, John Hamino, Gibson Kamau Kuria, Kiraitu Murongi, Wangodu wa Karioki, Maina wa Kenyatti, Willie Mutunga, David Law, over 50 University of Nairobi students, and hundreds of other Kenyans. When Koigi got detained the second time in 1982, he did have not one, but two support pillars, his wife and his mother. Although he was only 33, he felt more mature and unbreakable than he felt the first time he was detained by Kenyatta in 1975. Duta, Koigi's wife, was left with the hard task of fending for herself and her young boy. Being the wife of a former MP who had now been disgraced by treason charges, Duta knew she had to be strong for the boys. The international community was also pressurizing the government to release political prisoners of conscience. And like in 1978, when Moi used Madaraka Day celebrations to save face, he also used the same date, 12th December 1984, to pardon Koigi and other political detainees. What Nduta and Wago didn't know was that the 2.5 years that they had endured when Koigi was in prison would look like a minute compared to the darkness that was coming. Although Koigi was a free man, he never tasted the fruits of his freedom. He was still a followed man. When he tried business, the government interfered. When he contested for the Nakuru North seat in 1986 by-elections, Moi rigged him out in broad daylight. There was no way he could ever become Moi's MP again. And that's when he decided to seek asylum in Norway in 1986. But while Koigi was away, during that time in Kenya, the oppression by Moi's government had reached fever pitch. There were several underground publications that tried to give hope to those in the struggle, Mapambano and Mwakenya. During 1986 and 1987, student unrest led to the temporary closing of the University of Nairobi and gave the opportunity to the government to suppress an unofficial left-wing opposition group known as Mwakenya, Muungano wa Wazalendo wa Kenya, Union of Patriotic Kenyans. By early 1987, over 100 university professors, students, and journalists were arrested on charges of sedition in connection with Mwakenya activities, allegedly the printing and distribution of pamphlets critical to the regime. President Arap Moi even got paranoid and contended that the brains behind the Mwakenya movement are intellectuals and that wearing a beard in Kenya was synonymous with subversion of the government. This Mwakenya era conveniently coincided with the completion of Moi's landmark project, Nyayo House. The basement was specifically designed to torture dissidents. The government's method of extracting information was so harsh that many detainees confessed to crimes and membership to Mwakenya simply to escape further torture, even at the cost of an unfair trial and a potential 4 or 5-year prison term. In London, Amnesty International 1987 records an instance at a student gathering in London when President Arap Moi himself confirmed the official use of torture to force essential information out of uncooperative political detainees. He stated, "We only torture detained members of the disruptive dissident group, Mwakenya. Otherwise, how are we going to get important information from them? They are out to destroy everything we value in our society." Some of the early visitors of the Nyayo House interrogation chambers were Mirogi Kariuki in 1986, but he came out with a punctured kidney after being savagely beaten. Columnist and humorist Wahome Mutahi and his brother Juguna Mutahi were detained in 1986. He was charged with sedition and alleged association with the underground Mwakenya movement. They were both released after 15 months without ever being brought on trial. His imprisonment inspired him to write 3 Days on the Cross and Jailbirds. Peter Karanja was put through hell in the torture chambers for 20 days in 1987. He died in hospital. An autopsy revealed that his feet, legs, and arms were covered with septic ulcers. There was evidence of severe internal bleeding. Lawyer Gibson Kamau Kuria was also detained for a month in 1987. He was questioned about a meeting he had with Koigi 3 years earlier, 1984. But things were only getting worse. Moi was making himself a demigod. In 1988, 2 constitutional amendments were passed by Parliament without debate. The first, to extend from 24 hours to 14 days the period during which the police may hold those suspected of committing capital offenses incommunicado detention without recourse to judicial inquiry. The Second Amendment allowed Moi to control the judiciary by placing or firing senior judges and members of the Public Service Commission. The government was able to make sure that Koigi would still suffer mentally, although he was in Norway. Moi targeted Koigi's extended family. Monica Wango, Koigi's mother, was ejected from her Rugongo village farmhouse in June 1988. Her house was demolished. Then, on April 1989, her store, full of maize, was razed down. People close to Moi even held demonstrations against Koigi, who was deemed to be the leader of Mwakenya and the leader of the Kenya Patriotic Front. Gogi Wadiongo was the spokesperson for Mwakenya. The placards read, Koigi mjinga, Gogi wazimu, Nyayo juu. In a cruel twist of fate, the Minister for Foreign Affairs was sent to Norway in late 1989 to try and mend the bad international image that Koigi had painted to the Norwegians. This was after the constitutional amendments that had given Moi power to detain as well as power to hire and fire judges. Ouko defended the government that he was part of, arguing that this did not affect justice. Ouko denied allegations that Kenya had political prisoners and that detainees were tortured. But fate is such an unforgiving master, as about 4 months after those claims, Ouko himself was tortured and brutally murdered by the same regime that he was defending. Then, like a moth to a light, Koigi decided to visit Uganda in 1990. Little did he know, from the moment he fled for exile to the moment he landed in Uganda, the government was watching. Someone was following. Shortly after, he was kidnapped, dragged and bound. He was transported to Nairobi to be a guest at the Nyayo torture chambers. When he woke up, he was drowsy, his head heavy with sedation. After a while, he realized that he was in a dark isolation cell. Nearby, there was a powerful fan that blew both hot air and cold air alternatively. When it was blowing cold, the cell felt like a freezer. He shivered, his teeth chattered uncontrollably. His toes, his fingers, they started to darken with frostbite. When it was blowing hot, the cell felt like one standing in the middle of Sahara Desert at noon. Koigi would sweat until his body was dehydrated. There was also a pipe that let in cold water at night. The cold water rose to his ankles. When he couldn't stand any more, he sat in the water, all the while naked and his hands tied to his back. When his eyes started to adapt to the dark, he saw a white panic button on the wall across. He struggled to stand. He walked slowly, hoping that someone would respond to his panic call. He pressed the white button with his chin. He heard a buzzer ring in a distant room. He pressed again and waited 30 minutes. But no one came. He pressed again and waited an hour. Still, no one came. It was then that he realized that that was the designed psychological torture. Then, after what seemed like eternity, the cell's door finally creaked open. 8 men entered the cell. But the special branch knew that for the treason charges to hold, their version of altered truth had to be corroborated by a state witness. Treason charges carried a death penalty, and that was the only way to take out Koigi for good. So they arrested one of his friends, Githinji Kirago. The special police drove him to the dark dungeons beneath the floors of Nyayo House. He was tortured and promised freedom in exchange of testifying against Koigi. For months, they tortured him. Githinji agreed to testify. He signed a testimony claiming that he was a Libyan-trained guerrilla and a member of the Kenyan Patriotic Front led by Koigi. He claimed that Koigi was the leader and that they had crossed the Ugandan border armed and ready to start a revolution. But Githinji, aware that even if he exchanged his freedom for a lie, he wouldn't be able to live with himself. He opted to take matters into his own hands. literally. The Daily Nation reported. Sources said the suspect had been in protective custody. At approximately 3 p.m. on Sunday, he disarmed policemen guarding his cell in the basement of Nyayo House and allegedly grabbed a G3 rifle, a Uzi submachine gun, and 3 pistols. It was a scene out of a Hollywood thriller. Githinji shot his captor. On hearing gunshots, other officers ran towards his cell. Githinji knocked 2 down as he figured an escape route. But there were more pursuing him. Githinji sprayed the walls behind him with bullets from the machine gun, forcing his pursuers to flee. He ran up the stairs, but the building was empty and the office doors were locked since it was on a Sunday. More than 300 officers were deployed to hunt him. They combed through the 26 floors throughout the night, hoping to capture Githinji alive. It was not until the early hours of Monday morning that they found him. He tried to hold an officer hostage to force the pursuers to retreat. But there was a sharpshooter among them. Githinji was taken out. A single shot to his torso. He died instantly. As the only witness against Koigi in the treason case, Githinji's death meant that Koigi and his co-accused would live to tell his story. But finally, Moi had his grip from John Koigi. This time he would not let go. Not unless an unsurmountable force came to defend Koigi. So, Koigi called his mother. Wango answered. So always, I'm Jeph Kafka. Subscribe, share with your friends, and thank you for the continued support. Asante.